Welcome to How to Retire on Time, a show that answers your questions about all things retirement, including income, taxes, Social Security, healthcare, and more. This show is an extension of the book, How to Retire on Time, which you can grab today on Amazon, or you can get a free copy by downloading it by going to www.retireontime.com. My name is Mike Decker. I'm the author of the book, but I'm also a licensed financial advisor, insurance agent, and tax professional, which means when it comes to financial topics, we can talk about it all. Now, that said, please remember this is just a show. Everything you hear should be considered informational, as in not financial advice. If you want financial advice, you can contact our team by going to www.yourwealthanalysis.com and request your wealth analysis. With me in the studio today is my co-host, colleague, Mr. David Franson. David, thanks for being here.
Yep, thank you. Glad to be here.
David's going to read your questions, and I will do my best to answer them. You can always submit your questions anytime during the week by texting them to 913-363-1234. Again, that's 913-363-1234. Or you can email them to heymike@howtoretireontime.com. Let's begin.
Hey, Mike, what's better, caps like on a buffered ETF or participation like on a structured note? We're deep in the weeds here. We've just wandered into like waist high.
Yeah.
You're going to have to explain this.
Someone's getting our... So when you download our book, How to Retire on Time, which you can do at retireontime.com right now.
Yes.
But we go through 20-some days of additional trainings in addition to the book.
Okay.
It's an expansive series of just incredible preparation for everyone that's going to be retiring. I'm willing to guess this person just there's one email specifically that talks about this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So great question. Let me explain to everyone who has no idea what a captive spread and participation means.
Yeah, rephrase it, please.
So you have a couple of products that are indexed. An indexed product basically means that you participate in growth based on an index on the upside, but you have no downside risk.
All right.
Okay, so let me say that again. You put some money in, let's say $100,000 into a product. If the S&P, for example, or the NASDAQ or whatever index it's associated with increases in value, you make money. But if it decreases in value, you do not lose money.
Okay, there's like a backstop there.
Yep.
All right.
Here are some examples of indexed products: buffered ETFs, structured notes, fixed indexed annuities, indexed universal life insurance. Those are the most popular ones that I see.
All right.
So let's talk about the buffered ETFs and the structured notes. Here's how they work. Buffered ETFs operate typically off of a cap. That means that if you put money in there, you will make up to a certain amount of money, but nothing above.
You run into the cap.
Yep,
Okay.
You max out. So right now, as of today's recording, a max buffer, which means you've got no downside risk, you can go up to 7%. So if the S&P makes 6%, you make 6%.
Mm-hmm.
If the S&P makes 12%, you make 7% because there's a cap at 7%. If the S&P goes down 20%, you didn't lose money, but you didn't make money.
Yeah.
And then there's maybe like, I don't know, 0.5, 0.7 expense ratio fees.
Okay. That's low.
For what they're doing, I think it's reasonable.
Okay.
And every buffered ETFs can have different fees associated with it. But what they're doing, and this is pretty complicated, so I apologize. Let me know if David, if I've lost you, okay?
Yeah, if you go off the rails, I'll steer you back.
For all the regulators listening in right now, I am going to explain this as simple as I can. Please note this is an oversimplified explanation. It's not exactly how it works. I'm just trying to teach people right now the gist.
Mm-hmm.
Is that fair for everyone listening in? We good with that?
Yep.
So we don't dive into quantum physics. I'm just kidding. Okay. So what they basically do is they are buying an option, or they're selling an option contract. So they're selling the idea that after 7%, someone else can buy it and then enjoy the profits. So here's an example. Buffered ETF will sell a contract that basically says to this other entity, hey, if the S&P goes above 7%, we'll sell it to you at that 7% price, but then you can turn around and sell it yourself at a higher price. So like, let's say the S&P goes up 15%.
Okay.
They have the right to then buy it at that 7% growth price, turn around same day, and then sell it at the 15% growth. They made 8% profit. So they're buying the right to exercise this contract, knowing that it might happen, it might not. I think it's like 66% of the time the S&P has double-digit returns, something like that. Over 50% of the years, the S&P has double-digit returns.
So it sounds like a good calculated risk then.
Yeah, so it's beneficial to the person buying this contract. They're saying, yeah, I'm willing to pay some money for it because typically I'll make money. Every now and then I won't. That's fine. I'll let it expire. But so you've got the buffered ETF who's like, yeah, we just want the first 7%. The other person who's sharing in this saying, yeah, we want the excess. We're going to pay for it. But on both sides of the trade, they're being compensated appropriately for the risk that they're taking.
Okay.
So do you see how there's two ends to it?
Yeah.
And then what they'll do is they'll then turn around and they'll buy an option contract saying if the S&P goes down, if it loses money, they have the right then to basically reset. And I'm oversimplifying this, but just go to zero and someone else takes the losses. Why would someone do that? Because the markets crash every 7 to 8 years. Usually it's up. So they're making money usually knowing they're going to take a hit every now and then, but they're being compensated appropriately for the risk that they're taking.
Makes sense.
And these contracts will vary in value, in price. Okay. But that's what's going on. So you've got really three entities here. They're all playing a game. They're all playing it and saying, I'm willing to take a certain risk. But for the average person, you just got to know back on the institutional side that the things happening behind closed doors, whatever, they know what they're doing. They're okay with the risks they're taking. It's not magic. It's just the retail investor who wants a buffered ETF is saying, I just want consistency with protection.
Right.
And they then go in and make these mechanics work for you. So it's easier for you, but fair for them.
Sure.
Now, it's one of the problems is you might say, well, a 7% buffer. Well, most of the time the markets do really, really well. So I should get close to 7% regardless. No, that's not how it works. On average, if you look back since 2000, a buffered ETF, for example, and there's some back-tested data here because they weren't really available until around 2018, but a buffered ETF would give you around 5.5% average return because some years are 0, some years there's 2%. So you're not getting around a 7%. You're getting around a 5.5% return.
Okay.
You with me so far?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is great podcasting. This is great radio.
Yes, professor, keep going.
So then you've got structured notes. They're built a little bit differently in that what they'll do is they'll take, let's say you put 100,000 into something. They're going to take, let's say 95% of all of that and put it into a fixed product like a note, a banking note. And let's say that note's at 5.2%.
Okay.
So after 1 year time, that 95% or 95,000 becomes 100,000.
Okay. Okay.
No risk.
Yeah.
And then what they do is they then have the 5% of the 5,000 remaining, and they're buying option contracts. They're buying the right to basically buy it at a low price and then sell at a higher price. They're buying options. They're buying calls.
Is this an insurance company that does a structured note or is it somebody else?
Banks.
Oh, banks.
Institutions.
Do. Okay.
Yeah. Fixed index annuities are for the insurance side. Structured notes are on the institutional, like the security side.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So what they'll do then is they're going to say, all right, so if the index goes up, you're going to participate based on that option contract. So maybe you get 50, 60, 70% participation. So if the S&P goes up, let's say 10%, you got, let's say 6 or 7% on the growth. The S&P goes up 20%, maybe you got around 14% of the growth. They're not meant to make you rich. They're just meant to give you growth potential, but have reasonable protection.
Sure.
The caveat, though, is the structured notes are going to have more fees.
Okay.
So you're going to pay probably 2-3% in fees regardless of the outcome.
And why do they have more fees than other things? Is there a good explanation?
Yeah.
Or just do it?
So we'll have to bring in fixed index annuities to answer the question.
Oh, okay.
If you could get 70% participation rate of the S&P, so as in if the S&P goes up 10%, you get 7%.
Okay.
Right? So you get 70% of whatever happens. On the upside, none of the downside. But you pay 2-3% fees. You could take that same model and put it into an insurance product called a fixed index annuity, as long as you don't turn on income or buy these riders. But instead of 70% of the upside, you're going to have like 50% of the upside. So do you see how there's no quote unquote fee, but there's an opportunity cost?
Oh, okay.
Because they're making money off of your money. I can't officially say that, but let's call it as it is.
Yeah, sure.
There's so many ways you could skin the cat, but these are all indexed products. And then the last one we didn't talk about are spreads. Spreads are more on the fixed index annuity side, not structured notes, not buffered ETFs, but they're worth mentioning. And that's where you get everything after a certain point. So let's say there's a 3% spread. You're going to get everything after 3%. So if the markets go up 10%, you don't get the first 3%. You got everything after that, so you'd get 7%.
Okay.
So these are different ways that you can structure index products. It's extremely complicated from the option contracts and the mechanisms underneath it that are making these things possible. It's not magic. It's not some secret market. It's just very advanced structuring of products.
Okay? Right.
Now, based on my experience and my research, which is better?
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, did we answer the question?
Participation rates.
Okay.
A reasonable participation rate, because it's uncapped,
right,
is typically, in my opinion, better if it is associated in equities.
Yeah.
So if it's associated with the S&P 500, you want to be uncapped because the S&P it's volatile, has some great years, has some terrible years, but you want to not be capped in those situations. If it's like a bond fund situation, first off, I'd be concerned about it because bond funds are subject to all sorts of additional issues. But a bond fund can be a little bit more boring. Maybe the cap is more appropriate for that situation. So there's some nuance, but generally speaking, if you want the simple answer, I would typically prefer a participation rate because you're uncapped.
That makes sense. If there's a hard cap, you're guaranteed, like, I'm not going above that.
Yeah.
I'm limited. I'm being held back.
You know, it's like you want to be somewhere between Babe Ruth, who swings for the fences, and Ichiro, who just tries to get on first.
Yeah. Yes. I see what you did there, you Seattle guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I'm a Kansas
City guy. Okay, good.
But yeah,
we have adopted you.
Yeah, well, I'm still sleepless in Seattle. I don't know. All right.
Yeah.
Anyway, does that answer the question?
I think it does, yeah.
That's all the time we've got for the show today. If you enjoyed the show, consider subscribing to it wherever you get your podcast. Just search for How to Retire on Time. Discover if your portfolio is built to weather flat market cycles or if you're missing tax minimization opportunities that you may not even know exist. Explore strategies that may be able to help you lower your overall risk while potentially increasing your overall growth and lifestyle flexibility. This is not your ordinary financial analysis. Learn more about Your Wealth Analysis and what it could do for you regardless of your age, asset, or target retirement date. Go to www.yourwealthanalysis.com today to learn more and get started.